You pull your blanket over your shoulders, maybe you check your phone one last time. A few messages, a couple of short videos, a quick glance at tomorrow's weather. Eventually, the lights go out, the room falls quiet, and sleep arrives inside a home built to keep almost every danger outside. It's such an ordinary routine that we rarely stop to question it. Now imagine stripping all of that away. No walls, no locked doors, no mattress, no electricity, no comforting glow from a bedside lamp. Instead, you're sitting beneath an open sky wrapped in animal skins, listening as unseen creatures move through the darkness just beyond the reach of your eyes. Somewhere nearby, something is hunting. You don't know what it is. You only know that it can almost certainly see you better than you can see it. For millions of years, this wasn't an extraordinary situation. It was simply night. We spend nearly a third of our lives asleep, yet almost everything about the way we experience darkness today is profoundly unnatural by prehistoric standards. We think of night as downtime, a pause between productive days. But, for our ancestors, sunset marked the beginning of an entirely different world, one governed by different rules, different dangers, and different opportunities. So what actually happened after the sun disappeared? How did early humans survive hours when their greatest predators were just beginning to wake? What did they do before beds, before houses, before electric light transformed darkness into little more than an inconvenience? The answer is far stranger than most people imagine. Because the night didn't simply test early humans. In many ways, it helped create them. Long before cities lit up the horizon and street lamps turned midnight into twilight, darkness was something most of us can barely imagine. It wasn't the soft darkness of a bedroom with light leaking through the curtains or the faint glow of distant buildings. It was complete. Once the sun disappeared below the horizon, the landscape dissolved into a blackness so absolute that even familiar ground became unrecognizable. A tree only a few steps away vanished. Your own hands disappeared if you held them in front of your face. The world didn't simply become harder to see. It ceased to exist beyond the tiny limits of your remaining senses. That darkness changed the balance of power. Humans are remarkably capable during the day. Our sharp color vision helps us identify ripe fruit, read subtle facial expressions, and spot movement across open landscapes. But none of those strengths matter when the light is gone. Compared with many predators, our night vision is surprisingly poor. We lack the reflective layer behind the retina that gives cats and many other mammals their glowing eyes in the dark. Our hearing is respectable, but hardly exceptional, and our sense of smell is nowhere near powerful enough to compensate for the loss of sight. Sunset transformed one of Earth's most adaptable animals into one of its more vulnerable ones. Unfortunately, many of the creatures sharing prehistoric landscapes experienced the exact opposite transformation. Lions, leopards, hyenas, wolves, and numerous extinct predators were most active during the cooler hours of dusk and night. Darkness concealed their movements while amplifying every advantage they already possessed. Keen hearing, sensitive noses, silent footsteps, and eyes perfectly adapted to low light. As the sun slipped below the horizon, the hunters were just beginning their work. For early humans, surviving the day often depended on finding food. Surviving the night depended on not becoming it. That reality shaped nearly every decision people made before they could reliably control fire. As daylight faded, wandering across open ground became increasingly dangerous. Instead, groups searched for places where the landscape itself offered protection. Rocky overhangs, narrow caves, steep cliffs, dense thickets, or elevated ridges became valuable refuges because they reduced the number of directions from which danger could approach. A cave, despite its cold, damp interior, offered something priceless: predictability. If there was only one entrance, there was only one place an approaching predator could appear. Instead of scanning an endless darkness stretching in every direction, you could focus your attention on a single opening. The rock behind you became part of your defense. Nature had built the first security system long before humans ever imagined walls or locks. Not every group had access to caves, of course. Many slept beneath rock shelters or built temporary camps in locations that offered natural advantages. Elevated ground made it more difficult for predators to approach unnoticed. Dense vegetation could conceal a sleeping group while also forcing large animals to make enough noise that people might wake before an attack. Every landscape presented different challenges, but the principle remained the same: survive by making yourself as difficult to reach as possible. Yet the greatest protection was never the shelter itself. It was each other. Unlike many primates that sleep scattered among the trees, early humans increasingly rested in close-knit groups. Bodies pressed together for warmth during cold nights, conserving precious energy that would otherwise be lost to the surrounding air. More importantly, no two people slept exactly the same way. Some individuals naturally woke at the slightest unfamiliar sound, while others slept more deeply. That variation created an accidental but remarkably effective system of vigilance. Someone was almost always shifting, listening, or briefly opening their eyes. No formal guard schedule was necessary. Evolution had quietly distributed the responsibility throughout the group. This simple habit carried profound consequences. The people around you weren't merely companions, they were part of your survival strategy. Every additional set of ears increased the chance of detecting danger. Every extra pair of hands improved the odds of driving it away. Over countless generations, the safest humans were often those who stayed together, trusted, and responded collectively when the darkness tested them. Long before cooperation built villages, kingdoms, or civilizations, it first helped exhausted people survive until sunrise. And that instinct to face danger together would become one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. For hundreds of thousands of years, survival after sunset depended on finding the safest place to endure the darkness. Then, humanity discovered something that didn't simply make the night less frightening. It fundamentally changed its relationship with it. Fire. Exactly when our ancestors gained reliable control over fire is still debated, but archaeological evidence suggests that by around 400,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier in some regions, humans were no longer merely taking advantage of naturally occurring wildfires. They had learned to preserve flames, transport them, and eventually create them. That achievement ranks among the most important turning points in our evolutionary history. Most people think of fire as a weapon or a tool for cooking, and both are true. Cooking unlocked more calories from food, supporting larger brains and healthier bodies. Fire-hardened wooden spears became more durable. But once the sun disappeared, fire served an even more immediate purpose. It pushed back the dark. A campfire created something no human had ever possessed before: a boundary. Beyond its glow lay uncertainty. Inside it was a space where faces could be recognized, movements could be seen, and predators hesitated to enter. Large carnivores didn't suddenly become harmless, but many were instinctively cautious around open flames. Fire disrupted the conditions they depended on. They evolved to stalk unseen, using darkness as cover. A bright, flickering blaze erased much of that advantage. For the first time, humans could remain awake after sunset without devoting every moment to listening for approaching danger. That single change transformed the evening itself. Instead of retreating into silence, people gathered around the flames. The frantic urgency of daylight, tracking animals, gathering plants, making tools, caring for children, began to fade. Night became one of the few periods when there was little practical work left to do. The fire demanded occasional attention, but otherwise it invited something entirely different. Conversation. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, including the Hadza of Tanzania and the Ju-Hwansi of southern Africa, offer a remarkable glimpse into what those ancient evenings may have looked like. During the day, conversations are dominated by practical concerns. Who found water? Where are the game animals moving? Which plants are ready to harvest? Daily life revolves around solving immediate problems. After dark, however, the tone changes dramatically. Around the fire, practical discussions give way to stories. People recount the exploits of ancestors, explain how the world came to be, laugh about clever tricksters, celebrate acts of courage, and warn against greed or selfishness. These aren't simply entertainment. They preserve survival knowledge, reinforce social values, and strengthen the relationships that hold a community together. Every story carries information disguised as narrative. Long before books existed, stories became humanity's first library. A child listening beside the fire wasn't only being entertained. They were learning which animals to fear, how successful hunters behaved, why generosity mattered, and what kind of person earned the trust of the group. Knowledge could now travel across generations without anyone needing to witness the original events themselves. This may also have transformed the human mind in ways that are difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. Storytelling requires imagination. It asks listeners to picture people who are absent, places they've never visited, and futures that have not yet happened. It encourages empathy by allowing someone to experience another person's triumphs, mistakes, and emotions. Over countless generations, evenings around the fire may have helped shape the extraordinary cognitive abilities that distinguish our species today. In a sense, the campfire became humanity's first classroom, first theater, first history book, and first social network, all at once. The flames did far more than keep predators at bay. They gave people something equally powerful: time to think together. And as the fire illuminated familiar faces against an ocean of darkness, another ancient rhythm quietly unfolded. One that would seem strangely unfamiliar to most of us today. Human beings didn't always sleep the way we do now. That shared time around the fire eventually gave way to something every living creature needs: sleep. Yet the way our ancestors experienced it may have been very different from what most of us consider normal today. Modern society treats 8 uninterrupted hours as the gold standard. If you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, chances are you'll assume something is wrong. You might check the time, worry about how tired you'll be tomorrow, or convince yourself you've developed insomnia. But history suggests that this anxiety may be surprisingly recent. The historian Roger E. Kirch spent decades examining thousands of historical sources, from personal diaries and court records to medical texts and literature. Again and again, he encountered references to something most people have never heard of: a first sleep and a second sleep. These weren't poetic expressions. They described an ordinary nightly routine that appears throughout Europe and is echoed in traditions stretching much further back. People typically went to bed a few hours after sunset and slept for 3 or 4 hours. Then they woke naturally, not with alarm or frustration, but calmly, as if waking in the middle of an afternoon nap. They remained awake for an hour or two before settling into their second sleep, which lasted until dawn. This quiet interval wasn't wasted time. It was simply another part of the night. Some people tended the fire, making sure its warmth would last until morning. Others prayed, believing these silent hours were especially suited for reflection and communication with the divine. Couples often used the time to talk or be intimate. Parents cared for infants, farmers checked on livestock, and many people simply lay awake thinking about their dreams or discussing the events of the day with those beside them. In a world without clocks dictating every hour, there was little reason to rush back to sleep. So what happened to this ancient rhythm? The answer arrived with artificial light. Gas lamps first extended the evening, and electric lighting transformed it completely. As people stayed awake later into the night, the gap between the two periods of sleep gradually disappeared. Instead of sleeping in 2 natural phases, we compressed them into a single, uninterrupted block. Over time, waking peacefully in the middle of the night stopped feeling normal and began to feel like a problem. Ironically, if you occasionally find yourself awake in the small hours, clear-headed, calm, and in no immediate hurry to fall asleep, your body may not be malfunctioning at all. It could simply be echoing a rhythm that guided human nights for countless generations before electricity rewrote them. And while our sleeping patterns changed, our ancestors were also quietly transforming the places where they slept, revealing an ingenuity that reaches far deeper into prehistory than most people ever imagine. If there is one idea that keeps appearing throughout human history, it is that our ancestors were never passive survivors. Faced with a problem, they observed it, experimented with solutions, and passed successful ideas to the next generation. Sleep was no exception. Even hundreds of thousands of years before cities or agriculture, people weren't simply lying down wherever exhaustion overtook them. They were deliberately engineering better nights. One of the most remarkable pieces of evidence comes from Border Cave in present-day South Africa. Archaeologists have uncovered layers of carefully arranged grasses and other plant materials dating back roughly 200,000 years. These weren't random piles of vegetation. They were intentionally constructed sleeping surfaces, renewed again and again over thousands of years. Even more surprising was what lay beneath them: ash. Not the scattered remains of a nearby fire, but ash deliberately spread under the bedding itself. Today we know that fine ash helps repel insects such as fleas, ticks, and mites by disrupting their bodies and making the environment difficult for them to survive in. Early humans obviously couldn't explain the chemistry involved, but they didn't need to. They only needed to notice a pattern. Sleep on ash-covered bedding, and you wake up with fewer bites. Repeat the practice often enough, and it becomes tradition. That simple observation reveals something profound. Someone noticed a problem, tested a solution, remembered the result, and taught it to others. In its most basic form, that's the scientific method long before science had a name. Different environments demanded different innovations. During the Ice Age, the greatest enemy wasn't insects, but cold. Winter temperatures across much of prehistoric Europe and Central Asia could become lethal after only a few hours of exposure. Under those conditions, survival depended less on comfortable bedding and more on staying warm through the night. The solution was cooperation once again. People slept close together, sharing body heat in a living blanket that conserved precious warmth. A single individual loses heat rapidly, but a tightly packed group creates its own insulated microclimate. What appears to us as simple closeness was actually an elegant solution rooted in basic physics, refined through countless winters. Researchers also believe that variation in human sleep itself became part of this survival strategy. Some people are naturally light sleepers, waking at the slightest unfamiliar sound, while others remain deeply asleep for longer periods. Rather than being a flaw, this diversity may have benefited the entire group. A camp in which everyone slept heavily was vulnerable to surprise attacks. A camp containing a mixture of light and deep sleepers almost always had someone stirring, listening, or responding first if danger approached. Seen together, these discoveries paint a very different picture of prehistoric life. Early humans weren't merely enduring the night until sunrise, they were studying it, adapting to it, and gradually reshaping it through observation and experience. Yet, for all their practical ingenuity on the ground, many cultures eventually turned their eyes upward. Because once immediate survival was secured, the darkness above became just as important as the darkness around them. As humans gradually mastered the immediate dangers of the night, darkness became something more than a challenge to survive. It became a source of information. The very absence of daylight revealed patterns that remained invisible beneath the sun, and across the world, different cultures learned to read those patterns with astonishing skill. Look upward, and the stars become more than beautiful points of light. They become a calendar, a compass, and a clock. The ancient Maya understood this better than almost anyone. Their priests carefully tracked the movements of celestial bodies, particularly Venus, whose appearances at dawn and dusk were woven into decisions about warfare, agriculture, and religious ceremonies. Their cities were aligned with remarkable astronomical precision because the night sky was not decoration. It was a guide to understanding time itself. Elsewhere in Mesopotamia, generations of scholar priests spent centuries recording eclipses, planetary movements, and unusual events in the heavens. They interpreted these signs as messages from the gods. But beneath those beliefs was something deeply human, the desire to discover order in nature by observing it patiently over long periods. Their conclusions reflected their worldview, yet their commitment to careful observation laid an early foundation for systematic inquiry. Not every lesson came from looking upward. Polynesian navigators transformed the night into an ocean map. Guided by the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars, combined with ocean swells, winds, birds, and clouds, they crossed thousands of kilometers of open Pacific with extraordinary accuracy. In darkness, the sky became a navigation system more reliable than any landmark on the horizon. The same principle appeared in everyday work. Ironworkers discovered that glowing metal revealed its true temperature far more clearly against a dark background, allowing them to forge with greater precision. Farmers in arid regions often irrigated crops after sunset, when cooler temperatures dramatically reduced evaporation. Growing cities organized sanitation during the night, keeping crowded streets cleaner and more pleasant during daylight hours. In the far north, where winter darkness could last nearly an entire day, Viking communities extended their lives with fish oil and whale fat lamps, refusing to let the long nights bring society to a halt. Seen together, these practices reveal a profound truth. Ancient people did not treat darkness as an empty gap between days. They learned that the night uncovered information the daylight concealed. It revealed the stars, the subtle colors of heated metal, the most efficient hours to conserve water, and the rhythms of a world that never truly slept. The more humanity learned to read the night, the more it transformed darkness from something to fear into one of its greatest teachers. And perhaps that's the greatest misconception we have about our ancestors. We imagine they simply endured the darkness, counting the hours until sunrise, but they did far more than survive it. They learned to live within it. The night became a place where stories preserved history long before writing existed. It became a classroom where knowledge passed from one generation to the next, an observatory where the movements of stars revealed the seasons, a workshop where skilled hands could read glowing metal with greater precision, and a sanctuary where families rested together, protected by cooperation rather than walls. Even sleep itself followed rhythms that feel unfamiliar to us today, but guided human lives for thousands of generations. There's no question that artificial light transformed civilization for the better. It extended our days, improved safety, accelerated discovery, and made the modern world possible. Few of us would willingly trade electricity for a campfire. Yet in conquering the darkness, we also distanced ourselves from a way of life that shaped the human mind for hundreds of thousands of years. The stars faded behind city lights. The campfire conversations became television screens. The silence of the night gave way to glowing notifications, and ancient rhythms quietly slipped from memory. So the next time you wake in the middle of the night, don't immediately assume something has gone wrong. For a moment, simply listen to the quiet. Long before alarm clocks, bedrooms, or electric light, countless generations of humans found themselves awake beneath the same darkness. It may be one of the oldest experiences our species still carries, a small reminder that somewhere beneath modern life, your ancestors are still awake with you.